Holy shit. He said what? I don't think anybody at Netflix could have seen the show before it went out, because it's not entertainment. It's not edifying in any way. It's really, really bizarre.
I nearly entered rehab yesterday. That is the biggest pile of crap I've ever seen on television in my life.
Everything she touches turns to shit. And I think every sort of creative person behind her or deep pocket behind her knows it's an extraordinary risk. She's too toxic to touch.
What's the title of her show? Love Meghan. For what? To watch? Who wants to watch Meghan Markle bake a pie?
She walked away from the palace. She walked into Hollywood. And now Netflix is walking away from her. No press release, no final words, just gone. Season 2 of With Love, Meghan was supposed to be her next big act, a personal, polished follow-up to a narrative that already shattered traditions and rattled crowns. But before it could even drop a trailer, it was wiped off the map, quietly, strategically, suspiciously. And the timing? Way too perfect to be random. On the surface, it's being framed as a business decision. Performance didn't meet expectations. But behind closed doors, something else may have been unraveling, something bigger than just a canceled show. Because the rumors aren't just floating, they're multiplying. Some insiders claim Meghan was about to get political, maybe too political. Others say the royal family wasn't thrilled with what she planned to reveal. There's even speculation that Netflix was never fully on board with season 2's direction. And instead of risking controversy, they chose erasure. Erased the project, erased the risk, erased her. Again, so was this just another underperforming series getting the axe? Or was this a silencing, carefully timed, and globally calculated? One thing's clear, someone wanted this show off the radar. And what that means for Meghan's future in media is where the real story begins.
People aren't watching it. I mean, it's an effort to watch a single episode, because each episode is 40 minutes long. And you've got to have a lot more interest in Meghan Sussex.
Biggest absurdity of this whole thing was just how over-the-top perfect everything has to be around her. Her outfit. I mean, who the hell picks fucking berries in a white cashmere blouse and white pants? Literally no one on earth does that.
Netflix didn't flinch when it canceled With Love, Meghan Season 2. No build-up, no statements, not even a final push to salvage what was left. According to official reports, it was a simple numbers game. The show didn't perform, the ROI wasn't there, and Meghan's star power, once seen as a guaranteed ratings magnet, had lost its spark. But if you pause and look closer, none of it adds up. Netflix has kept shows alive with far worse numbers, some critically panned, some virtually invisible. And yet, they still got second chances, promotional boosts, or at the very least, a farewell campaign. Meghan's show, nothing, just vanished. Which begs the question, was it really about data, or was data just the excuse? Industry insiders quietly admit the viewership for With Love. Meghan wasn't stellar, but it wasn't catastrophic either. In fact, early engagement metrics reportedly outperformed several series that did get renewed. So why wasn't this one given more time? The answer may lie in what Meghan was planning for season 2.
Why? Why are you doing this? Why are you demeaning yourself in this fashion? Because Meghan has hired a house which is supposed to be worth between 5 million and 10 million pounds. And she's got her famous friends, except of course none of us will have heard of her famous friends, so they're not that famous friends. And she's giving all these really bizarre and quite cryptic guides on how to be the perfect hostess.
Rumors suggest she was gearing up to pivot the tone. Less lifestyle, more commentary, less soft-focused branding, more real talk. That kind of shift, especially from a figure still tightly linked to royal legacy and political discourse, could have made executives nervous. Now combine that with Netflix's internal shakeups, cost-cutting frenzy, and recent trend of axing high-risk, low-control projects, and suddenly this starts to look less like a failure and more like a decision driven by fear. Fear of backlash, fear of pressure, fear of where the story was headed next. So while Netflix wants you to believe this was routine business, just another title lost in the algorithm, the abruptness, the silence, and the strategic erasure all point to something deeper. And we're just scratching the surface. Because if this wasn't about ratings, then what or who pulled the trigger? What if this wasn't just a cancellation, but a quiet command from across the ocean? It sounds dramatic, maybe even conspiratorial, but the whispers about royal interference won't die down. The theory is simple but explosive. Someone inside Buckingham Palace didn't want season 2 of With Love, Meghan to ever see the light of day, and they made sure of it.
It's actually worse, because the Harry and Meghan show at least had newsworthy lines, it at least had some purpose to it. Whereas this feels exactly what it is. It's something which was done clearly as a contractual obligation. Does anyone really care? And I think the answer is no.
Meghan Markle's relationship with the royal family has hasn't just been strained, it's been scorched. From the moment she and Prince Harry stepped away from official duties, tensions with the monarchy have only grown more public, more personal, and more damaging. The Oprah interview alone sent shockwaves through centuries of palace tradition, exposing racism, silencing, and systemic disregard. Meghan, once branded the modern Duchess, became a symbol of rebellion, and that image hasn't faded. So when news surfaced that season 2 might contain themes directly tied to identity, suppression, and coded critiques of royal life, speculation erupted. According to unconfirmed leaks from production sources, Meghan was preparing to explore narratives that could be interpreted as heavily personal, even if not explicitly about the royal family. But when someone with a platform like Meghan speaks, even in metaphor, it carries weight. And to a monarchy obsessed with image control, even subtle implications can feel like direct hits. So did a call come down from the top? Maybe not officially, maybe not directly. But the palace doesn't need to dial Netflix to make a message clear. Soft diplomacy, private lobbying, back-channel conversations, they've all been used before. And Netflix, a platform operating in dozens of countries and managing sensitive global relationships, might have seen more risk than reward in letting the show go forward. Quiet cancellation, minimal media attention, and the story disappears. That's the strategy. But in a world where power operates in silence, the lack of noise might be the biggest clue of all. Because if the monarchy did influence this decision, even behind the scenes, it means this wasn't just about protecting a brand. It was about protecting a throne.
And this is interesting because this is a Meghan project. This is not a Harry project or a Harry and Meghan project. This is on her. And what I think Netflix were hoping was that she would prove to be box office, because Harry often comes across as quite angry, a bit intellectually limited, not so much of a person that you would want to have front and centre with your shows, whereas she's much more intelligent than he is. But the thing is, you're looking at this programme, you're thinking, what are you thinking? I mean, why have you done this? And the answer is, you've done this because of a contractual obligation with Netflix.
By the time early drafts of season 2 were reportedly circulating within Netflix, something had shifted. This wasn't just another glossy docuseries about empowerment and positivity. According to insiders close to the project, Meghan was preparing to go deeper and much bolder. Instead of staying in the safe zone of curated interviews and lifestyle storytelling, she allegedly wanted to explore uncomfortable truths, racism in elite institutions, the invisible weight of privilege, the politics of gender, even the global pressures of being Black, female, and royal in a world that punishes all three. These weren't topics Netflix hadn't touched before, but coming from Meghan Markle, they weren't just segments, they were statements. And statements like that from someone with royal DNA and Hollywood polish become headlines before they're even spoken. That terrified people. Executives reportedly worried that the content, though powerful, was too hot to handle. Meghan's rising influence as both a cultural icon and a potential political voice made season 2 a risk, not because it wasn't good, but because it might have been too good at challenging the wrong narratives. And in today's volatile media climate, one wrongly interpreted clip, one outraged headline, and suddenly you're not hosting a show. You're igniting a firestorm. Netflix, already dealing with cultural backlash on multiple fronts, may have decided the fallout wasn't worth the buzz. Pulling the plug early, before marketing campaigns and teasers could stoke controversy, was the cleanest escape. But for Meghan, it was more than just a lost show. It was a silencing, a strategic one. And in that silence, a question remains. Did they cancel her project or censor her voice? Because if Meghan was truly preparing to step out of the safe, scripted spotlight and into raw political storytelling, then what got shut down wasn't just a show, it was a warning. Speak too loudly and the platform beneath you disappears.
Have you ever seen that video?
No.
Pull that video up, because it's one of my favorite.
Trick that people do with pineapple, instead of just cutting it to make the perfect little bite, you follow the wedge. When nature has given you all the cues on how to have a perfect taste of something.
Oh, how fun is that? I love it.
I like working hard.
This woman is being paid millions of dollars to show how to cut into a pineapple.
What if Meghan was never the plan, just the bait? Behind the glittering headlines and record-shattering deals, there's a theory gaining quiet traction, one that paints Netflix not as a creative partner, but as a calculating opportunist. It goes like this. Meghan and Harry weren't brought in to build a media empire. They were brought in to build hype. From the moment the Sussexes stepped back from royal duties, global attention followed them like a spotlight. Dramatic, scandalous, unpredictable. Netflix didn't just sign them for their storytelling potential, they signed them for their headline value. The $100 million plus deal wasn't about producing long-term prestige content. It was about leveraging a cultural moment, a brand new royal chapter dripping in controversy and global attention, served on a silver platter, just as Netflix was bleeding subscribers and desperate for buzz. And it worked. Their arrival dominated news cycles. Social media exploded. The docuseries, Harry and Meghan smashed viewing records upon release, but after the initial wave of excitement crashed, the numbers softened, engagement dipped, and worse, the projects that followed didn't deliver. Meghan's podcast deal with Spotify fizzled. The animated series Pearl was canceled before launch. And now, with love, Meghan has joined the quiet graveyard. But here's where it gets darker. Some insiders believe the couple was never expected to succeed creatively. They were used to buy attention in a crisis quarter, a PR move dressed up as a partnership. Once the metrics plateaued and the media machine moved on, Netflix began quietly cutting ties. First, less promotion, then reduced production, and finally, cancellation. No drama, no headlines, just a graceful fade out. And if that theory holds weight, it means the entire deal was never about Meghan's message or vision. It was about exploiting her moment, using the royal fallout as a marketing spike, riding the wave and jumping off before it turned into risk. A short-term transaction disguised as long-term collaboration. And for Meghan, that's not just business. That's betrayal.
Here comes the first time in her life that Meghan Markle actually touches food. Let's watch that back. Why is she pushing apples into the salad? Oh dear, even her hands can't do acting.
What mother or father in the name of sweet Jesus has enough time to create a fruit plate at 6 o'clock on a Monday morning when there's toast throwing around the room? And her kitchen was just sterile and awful, and I hate her. I'm so sorry, I really do.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
Long before Netflix made the decision to cancel. With Love Meghan, there were rumblings that the project was already unraveling, not from the outside, but from within. According to sources close to the production, Season 2 had become a pressure cooker of clashing visions, unspoken power struggles, and creative chaos. Meghan, known for being deeply hands-on and fiercely protective of her image, reportedly wanted to shift the tone of the show to be more authentic, raw, and message-driven. But Netflix executives, still reeling from prior controversies and cautious about alienating wide demographics, wanted to keep things polished, palatable, and politically safe. What started as a collaboration slowly devolved into a tug-of-war, with Meghan pushing for more control, more honesty, and more creative freedom, and Netflix pulling back, wary of content that could stir headlines for the wrong reasons. Insiders described production meetings filled with tension, script rewrites that never got approved, edits that stripped out entire segments, and in the middle of it all, a global icon trying to walk the line between storyteller and brand. Meghan wasn't just acting as talent. She was trying to direct the narrative, set the tone, and protect the integrity of her message. But in a system built to minimize risk and maximize reach, that kind of creative ambition often triggers alarm bells, especially when the content touches race, class, gender, or power. Add to that Netflix tightening budgets, reorganized leadership, and a post-pandemic shift towards safe bets only, and it becomes clear that the cracks in this partnership weren't recent. They were structural. This wasn't just a cancellation, it was a collapse, a slow, quiet unraveling of a high-profile deal that was doomed the moment the creative compass split in two. In the end, it wasn't just Meghan's message that Netflix couldn't support, it was Meghan's method. And when the two sides couldn't align on the how, the what stopped mattering entirely.
This is about connecting with friends.
No, I don't think it's going to be about connecting with friends. I think it's going to be about connecting with Meghan, because it's all about Meghan.
One of the executives came out and said they quite literally have no talent, but worse than that, they don't want to work. Never, ever.
By the time Season 2 was quietly shelved, some industry insiders were already calling it. This was never going to work. Not because the show was weak, but because the entire partnership was built on shaky ground from day one. When Netflix signed Meghan and Harry, it wasn't about legacy storytelling or cultural longevity. It was about striking while the iron was white hot. Their royal exit had just sent shockwaves across the globe. Headlines were bursting. Public interest was peaking. And in that moment, Netflix jumped on the opportunity, not because it saw a decade of brilliant content ahead, but because it saw clicks, buzz, numbers. But high-profile buzz rarely translates into creative stability. In fact, it often works against it. From the start, expectations around the Sussexes' deal were impossibly high. Every piece of content was judged not on its own merit, but through the lens of palace drama and political baggage. Meghan and Harry weren't just creators, they were symbols. And in that role, failure wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. Add to that the fact that both parties entered the deal with vastly different motives. Meghan seeking long-term storytelling power, Netflix seeking short-term media heat, and you have a powder keg. The audience too shifted. The public's fascination with the royal exit began to fade. The novelty wore off, viewers moved on, and the Sussex brand, once a disruptor, started to feel like a product. Overly managed, carefully sanctioned, sanitized, and increasingly difficult to connect with. For Netflix, which lives and dies by engagement stats, that's a red flag, especially now as the platform enters its most ruthless era yet, cutting shows left and right, abandoning anything that doesn't instantly deliver. In that environment, with Love, Meghan wasn't just vulnerable, it was doomed, not because it failed to entertain, but because it was never designed to withstand time, tension, and truth. This wasn't a cancellation based on failure, it was a delayed reaction to a deal that should have never been greenlit. Here's where the story turns from suspicious to almost surgical, because this wasn't just a quiet cancellation, this was a vanishing act. No official farewell, no thank you posts, no media wrap-ups. In fact, if you blinked, you might have missed it entirely. Within days of the decision, promotion for With Love, Meghan was pulled. Social media mentions dried up. Even internal links and references within Netflix's platform were reportedly buried or redirected. It was as if the show never existed. And that level of erasure doesn't happen by accident. It happens when someone wants it to happen. Fast, clean, without noise.
One of the most brutal reviews thus far of With Love, Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex's Netflix disaster. And guess whose words they were? Her own father, Thomas Markle.
What I think after all the negative reviews came out within the first day or two, what I think was driving a lot of the views is people seeing the reviews and thinking, it really can't be that bad, can it? And then they watched it and they're like, oh my goodness, it is that bad.
Executives call it brand containment. Crisis consultants call it soft delete. But to everyone else, it feels like something they don't want us to ask questions about. According to PR analysts, Netflix may have been trying to avoid the very thing they originally courted: attention. If Meghan's show was drawing controversy before season 2 was even released, then amplifying that energy through backlash, bad headlines, or royal drama could damage the platform's global image, especially in the UK, where Netflix's relationship with both regulators and royal-loving audiences remains fragile. So, the safest move? Erase it. Silently, let the world forget. No statements, no stories, just a strategic ghosting. And that's what really unsettles people. Not that a celebrity show got canceled, but that this show, with this level of visibility, this level of investment, could be wiped off the map so discreetly. It hints at conversations behind closed doors, at decisions made in high-rise offices with no paper trail. It suggests that Netflix wasn't just protecting itself from a bad business move, but from a narrative it no longer wanted to be part of. And in doing so, they didn't just end a series, they buried it, and maybe that's the biggest red flag of all. Not what was said, but what was carefully left unsaid. In the end, Netflix may never reveal the full truth behind the cancellation of With Love, Meghan. On the surface, it looks like a clean, data-driven decision. A show that didn't deliver, trimmed from a lineup that's constantly evolving. But when you step back and look at the timing, the silence, and the vanishing act that followed, it begins to look like something else entirely. Whether it was royal pressure, internal creative warfare, or cold business strategy wrapped in brand-friendly PR, one thing is clear. This wasn't just about low ratings. This was about control. Narrative control, image control, risk control. And Meghan Markle, a woman who has repeatedly refused to stay silent or fit neatly into the mold of either Hollywood or royalty, suddenly became too unpredictable to keep on screen. What makes this even more telling is how meticulously the show was scrubbed, not canceled with clarity, but buried under silence, as if the goal wasn't just to end a project, but to erase a narrative before it could start a fire. For Meghan, this could mark a turning point, not in her career, but in how institutions respond to her presence. And for Netflix, this may be a case study in what happens when a platform tries to walk the razor's edge between controversy and corporate diplomacy. But what if this cancellation wasn't the end of the story, just a distraction from the real one? Because while Netflix was pulling the plug, something even more explosive was unfolding across the world, behind palace walls, and inside a Dubai estate. And that's where the real chaos begins. If you think this was wild, you haven't seen anything yet.